All right, let's jump into this deep dive. And today we're looking at Honeywell International. Are they going to split up? Are they going to stay together? It's kind of a hot topic. We've got this article from the Motley Fool. Pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah, definitely a lot of buzz around this, especially with Elliott Management. They're really pushing for this breakup.
Oh, yeah, the activist investor.
Exactly. And they're saying Honeywell's conglomerate structure, it's hurting the value. They think separating it into aerospace and automation businesses, that's the ticket. Unlock that shareholder value.
So they're saying, like, being this jack of all trades is actually holding them back.
That's the argument. Investors would be happier with, let's say, a pure automation company instead of a piece of this, well, more complicated pie.
Okay, I get that. But Honeywell, I mean, they've been around forever. They must be doing something right. What makes Elliott think this split is going to be so magical for everyone?
Well, they're pointing to Honeywell's valuation. They say it's lower compared to companies like Emerson Electric or Johnson Controls. And the way they're measuring this, it's with this EV to EBITDA ratio. It's basically comparing a company's value to its earnings.
EV to EBITDA. Okay, I'm vaguely familiar.
Right, so Honeywell's ratio, it's lower, and Elliott's using that to say, look, they're undervalued.
So they're basically saying Honeywell is a bargain stock just waiting to explode.
Kind of.
Yeah.
They're betting that the market will reward these separate businesses, give them higher valuations. But of course, there's another side to this.
Oh, for sure. I was just thinking, Honeywell being so diverse, maybe that's actually a strength. Especially now, the economy's a little shaky, like a diversified investment portfolio. It spreads the risk, right?
Exactly. It's a valid point.
Yeah.
Honeywell's playing it safe, you could say. Elliott wants to go for the big win, but it's riskier.
High risk, high reward. Classic. But it's not just about the overall structure, right? Elliott's also zeroing in on those safety and productivity solutions businesses. They say those haven't been doing so hot.
Yeah, they're pointing to that, saying, look, this proves the structure isn't working. These businesses, things like warehouse tech, personal protective equipment, they have had some declines.
PPE, though. Didn't everybody in that space kind of take a hit after the pandemic? I mean, demand just dropped off a cliff. Seems a little unfair to blame Honeywell for that.
Yeah, you're right. And the article does acknowledge that some of these declines might be temporary factors, post-pandemic stuff, not necessarily the structure itself. They even mentioned Zebra Technologies. They focus on barcode and RFID. They had some sales dips, too. So it's not like Honeywell's alone in this.
Right, so maybe Elliott's trying to make a big deal out of something pretty normal.
It's possible.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Honeywell isn't just ignoring this. They're actually thinking about selling off their PPE business.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah, that could be a sign they're open to some changes, maybe even moving towards a gradual breakup, even if it's not the full split Elliott wants.
So they're kind of playing ball, just not on Elliott's terms.
Right. And it brings up this whole question. Would a separate Honeywell automation really be worth as much as Elliott thinks? They're comparing it to these pure-play automation companies, but their proposed Honeywell automation. It wouldn't just be that. It would have industrial automation, building automation, and even universal oil products. That's oil and gas stuff.
Wait, oil and gas, that's different.
Very different. And that's where Elliott's logic might be a little shaky. This mix of businesses, it might not be what investors looking for pure automation are really after.
So it's not as simple as just splitting things up and watching the money roll in.
Nope, it's definitely more nuanced than that. And you know what? Honeywell's already been doing some restructuring on their own. They separated their industrial and building automation divisions. And get this, they're spinning off their advanced materials business in 2025.
Hold on, spin-off. So, are they just changing the name on the door?
Think of it like they're giving this part of the business its own apartment, more independence, it becomes a separate company, and often they'll give shares of this new company to the existing Honeywell shareholders.
Ah, okay, so they're not letting go completely, but giving it some room to grow, and maybe testing the waters for more separations later on.
Possibly. It's a way to adapt, maybe even keep some investors happy, but without making any sudden, drastic moves.
This is getting complicated. I'm starting to see why this whole breakup thing is such a big debate. There's a lot to consider here.
Definitely. It's more than just headlines, This is some serious strategic maneuvering going on.
And Honeywell's playing the game pretty well, even with Elliott right there on their heels. But we've only scratched the surface, haven't we?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot more to dig into. Like, what does all this mean for investors? And what about this whole trend of activist investors? It's a big deal. We've got to talk about that. Hashtag TTS, the deep dive episode 2024-11-19, part 2 of 3.
Feels like we're watching like a corporate chess match, you know? Elliott makes a move, Honeywell counters. And this whole thing about activist investors, it's everywhere now, right?
It's definitely a growing trend. And yeah, this whole Honeywell thing, it really shows the kind of power these investors have. I mean, they can really shake things up, make companies change course.
But is that a good thing? Sometimes I wonder, are they just in it for like a quick buck? Push for short-term gains that actually hurt the company later?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a risk, for sure. Companies might make choices that, well, prioritize immediate profits over long-term stability, growth, especially if they're feeling the heat from investors who just want a quick return.
Yeah, like squeezing all the juice out of an orange just to get a little extra now, but then you're left with nothing.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
That's a real concern. But you got to remember, there are times when these activist investors, they can be a good thing. Sometimes a company needs a fresh perspective, someone to challenge the leadership. Yeah, think outside the box, make changes they might have been resisting.
So it's not so black and white, right? There's good and bad, like a double-edged sword or something.
Exactly. It really highlights how important it is to think for yourself as an investor, do your research. You can't just blindly follow the hype or assume an activist always knows what's best for the company.
Right. Which brings us back to Honeywell. They seem to be taking a more, measured approach. Making changes, but not panicking. Is that the right move here?
It's a calculated move, that's for sure. They're showing they're paying attention to Elliott, but they're doing things their way, on their own timeline. It could be a way to keep some investors happy while still sticking to their long-term strategy.
But what about all the other shareholders? They get a say in this too, right? How much power does Elliott really have?
That's a crucial point. Elliott's just one investor, even if they're a big one. Honeywell's fate, it depends on what the majority of shareholders decide. If enough of them side with Elliott, well, Honeywell might be forced to make bigger changes, even if they don't want to.
So it's almost like a popularity contest, like a corporate election where the shareholders are voting.
You could say that. And that's why it's so important to watch how the other big shareholders react. Do they jump on Elliott's bandwagon or stick with Honeywell's plan?
It's all about alliances, convincing people that your vision for the company is the right one. Talk about pressure. But this goes beyond Honeywell, right? It raises questions about like the role of activists in general. Are they getting too powerful?
That's a debate that's been going on for a while now. Some people say they're essential, to keep companies accountable, make sure they're acting in the best interest of the shareholders. Others, well, they worry that these activists are too obsessed with short-term profits, that they could destabilize companies, even entire industries.
So where do you stand on this? Are they good or bad for the market?
I don't think it's that simple. There are examples of both good and bad outcomes. It's about having a balanced view, not generalizing.
Makes sense. So what's the takeaway for our listeners? What should they be thinking about with this Honeywell thing and other situations with activist investors?
I'd say the most important thing is to be informed, to think critically. Don't just take everything you hear as fact. Do your research, consider all the different viewpoints, and form your own opinion. It's your money, your investments, your future.
Great advice. It's easy to get caught up in all the drama, but you got to step back and make your own decisions. So where do we go from here with Honeywell? What should we be watching for as this all plays out? Hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-11-19, part 3 of 3. So lots of possibilities here. What are the big things we should be watching for? In the next few months, what are the milestones or the big decisions that could happen?
Definitely keep an eye on how other major shareholders react to Elliott's proposal. That'll be a big sign, if Honeywell is really going to face pressure to actually break up.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, any announcements from Honeywell themselves about the PPE business or any more restructuring, that'll be important too.
Yeah, because even if they don't fully break up, they've already shown they're willing to, make some moves.
Right. They're not just sitting around. They want to control what happens,
High stakes game, for sure. But let's zoom out for a second. This whole Honeywell thing, it's just one example of something bigger, right?
Absolutely. This whole rise of activist investors, it's really changing how companies operate. They got to be more responsive to shareholders, which can be a good thing. But it also makes you think, about short-term profits versus what's good for the company long-term.
And for us regular investors, it's kind of tricky. You got to decide, do you side with these activists who are pushing for change, or do you trust the company to make the right calls?
Tough question. No easy answer. It really depends on your own goals as an investor, how much risk you're comfortable with, and, well, what you think of the whole situation. But this Honeywell case, it really shows you got to do your research. Don't just go with the headlines or what other people are saying.
Think for yourself.
Exactly. Take the time to understand both sides, then make your own decision.
Great advice. So, if you could give our listener one key takeaway, what would it be? For someone trying to make sense of all this.
I'd say, remember this Honeywell situation. It reminds us that the world of finance, it's complicated. Things are always changing. You've got all these different forces at play. And as an investor, you got to learn to navigate it all. The more you know, the better decisions you'll make for yourself and your money.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listener with a final thought. Imagine you're a Honeywell shareholder. You've heard Elliott's side, you've seen Honeywell's response. What would you do? Would you go for the split, hoping the stock price jumps up? Or would you stick with Honeywell, trust their plan for the future?
It's a big decision. It could have a real impact, not just on Honeywell, but on your own investments. So take what you've learned from our deep dive today, do some more digging if you need to, and make the choice that feels right for you.
That's what it's all about, getting informed, making smart choices. Thanks for walking us through this. It's been really interesting. Until next time, everyone, keep diving deep and don't be afraid to ask the hard questions.